Hello, YouTube. I wanted to do something a little bit more positive because recently I had to think and I kind of realized that while I am not unproud of my video catalog, even though some of those early ones are just like blur everywhere and me being like, "Hey guys, what's up?" I still am proud of those videos, but so many of them are negative. A lot of them are just negative, and I wanted to do something a bit more positive. So I wanted to talk about something that I like. And don't worry, it won't be boring. I any more than my other videos are. Positivity is often boring, but I'll try to keep it on the shorter side. I really like proto science fiction. That's the introduction to this. Is that I like proto science fiction and I like Jules Verne. Even though to me, I also think of Jules Verne as more of an adventure author than science fiction. Like, yeah, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is good science fiction, but I think his stories are much more about the adventure than anything else. And a lot of his straight adventure novels, of which he wrote many of, he wrote like 50 books total. Uh, those are the ones that I really like. I really like your Around the World in 80 Days more than maybe your Rubors. So here we have a particularly rare one of those exact tertiary works, Jules Verne's School for Crusoes, originally originally called the School for Crusoes, but also referred to as Godfrey Morgan, a California mystery. But A School for Crusoes is sort of the original title. This is a very good one. Now, even though it might be one of his obscure, his tertiary ones, and I couldn't even find an edition that wasn't this print on demand, Wildside Press, paperback that looks like this, it still is a very good find. Now, it's got a very tight plot. That's part of what I like about it, is that it's very tight. I, a lot more than some of his other novels. Uh, I mean, Jules Verne, whenever you get him, even if the adventure is good, even if the scientific concepts are all great, the characters are almost always going to be wooden, even if there's attempt to characterize them, and their emotional lives are always going to be flat. But this story sort of leans into it a bit by accentuating the comedic angle. So those flaws are kind of pushed to the side a bit because it's a bit cheesier. It's and the tightness is very welcome. Basically, the very beginning of this story shows an auction happening. The Californian government is auctioning off some island off the coast of California. And there's these two eccentric billionaires who are vying for it. And one of them gets the island. Then we immediately cut to this billionaire's son, who's a rich playboy who hasn't seen much of the world, failing to court this one woman. Not quite failing, but she says that she wants somebody who's done something with his life. And he takes that as a challenge. So he decides to go on a grand tour, which, young boys often did in the Victorian era, especially when they were done with their college education. They would go on a trip to Europe or something. And so he decides to go on this trip. His musical professor comes along with him, who's overly nervous. He's the comic relief sidekick, and then there's a little bout of racism that comes kind of out of nowhere, which is weird because this is a Jules Verne novel, and he's often very egalitarian and racially sympathetic, but out of nowhere there's a Chinaman that they throw off the ship, and they call him the N-word for some reason. And it's a bit hard to detect what Verne is doing because it seems like he plays both sides. Like he says that uh, that immigration policy should be strict, but also what they're doing is bad. And that's a weird part of the book, but we can overlook that part. Uh, it's weird because it could have been cut right out. And I almost wonder if this is like a weird translation. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and say it might be part of the translation why that scene came off so weird, because there's a similar moment in the Bacon's Millions where one of the early translations literally applied like the villain's racist rant to the hero. So that was really awful. And I don't think that this is some modern translation. They don't even say who translated it. this print on demand edition. But after that, our main hero gets shipwrecked, and that's when the adventure begins. That's when Crusoe, like so many books from the 1800s, this book is sort of a send up of the Robinson Crusoe story. Verne did a huge armload of these books. Many other people did many other versions of these books. And it's a wonderful formula. I really like a good Robinsonade, but the problem with them is that they can get a bit repetitive after reading Robinsonade after Robinsonade, just learning about like how they're making stuff, how they're doing stuff. It can get a little repetitive. Although if you love watching those like primitive building channels on YouTube, you can see the satisfaction involved in doing these kinds of things. And thankfully, that stuff in this book seems like it's kept relatively to a minimum. It's kind of a slim book. You see, this is how the text is formatted. It's not a terribly long book. This edition's only like 130 pages. So it gets just enough Robinson Crusoe building stuff in there so that it feels like Robinsonade, but not so much that it starts to get boring or drag along. And yeah, the story goes on from there, and there's a bit of a comedic twist to it as the musical professor sort of starts losing his mind and he thinks he's still at home. So Godfrey Morgan, the main character, has to like baby him as well as make sure that they could survive on this island. And they also meet. This isn't a spoiler, by the way, especially for a book as short as this and as old as this too. Spoilers for a 150-year-old book, but part of the way through they find a their own version of Man Friday. They rescue like a. I mean, there's no given nationality because of course it's ridiculous that there would be well, not that there would be like Pacific Islanders like within 10 miles of the Californian coast, but basically it's a black person, a black man who dressed as an islander, who seems to be an islander. I'll just say that. I don't want to get into spoilers, but I don't want to get into spoilers, but he seems like an islander is how I'll put it. And this is where some of the racial sympathy that Jules Verne has actually comes back into the story because he is the most competent of all the characters in the book. And he's the bravest and the kindest. And for most of the book, he doesn't speak a lick of English. Maybe I'll get to that later. But it seems that even as early as 1880, people were already sending up the racial part of Robinson Crusoe by making the Friday character like the more competent one, and Robinson Crusoe himself the sort of bumbling one. That's sort of what this book comes out with. So I like the dynamics between the characters, and when the plot gets going, it indeed gets going because the characters in this book discover there's more to this island than simple survival. There's also wild animals, alligators, crocodiles, which are basically the same thing, lions, tigers, bears, all kinds of wildlife, that it doesn't make sense that they would be living right next to California. Which reminds me a lot of Swiss Family Robinson, which Jules Verne also loved with a passion and wrote a couple of sequels to. So I think that that's definitely taking off of that, but they encounter all these wild creatures and have to fend themselves off. Luckily, they find a secret cache of weapons on the island very, very conveniently. And they, just like in the Swiss Family Robinson, they make their house inside of a giant tree. And it all sort of culminates, I won't give away too much, but it all sort of culminates in this really cool action scene, the kind that Jules Verne likes to do, where there's sort of a creative set piece. And that leads to a scene that I really, really love. It really sticks in my mind is that this feeling that is cultivated in one sentence, there's a there's like a mixture of suspense because of the action that's happening. It's sort of coming to a head. The characters seem like they're doomed, they're completely imperiled. So you got suspense, and then so you got suspense mixed with a comedic beat, mixed with a surprise twist. You have all three in like one moment, and I thought that that was like a really great part of the book. I love that part. So you can see that some of Jules Verne's like writing chops are really good here. And yeah, I really love this book. There's apparently a movie based off of this from 1981, some cheap Italian. I think it was Italian, maybe it's a French movie called like Mystery on Monster Island from 1981, and it's all on YouTube. I was thinking of watching it, right? And then I clicked on it, and the first scene I went to is the scene where the Friday character is in a tree, and like Godfrey Morgan is like throwing coconuts up to him, and it's just so painfully obvious that the footage of him like catching the coconut is actually just footage of him like throwing it off the tree, and then they just like reverse the footage, and it looks so terrible. And I said, okay, well, I'm not into B movies enough for to enjoy this kind of thing. I think I'll leave this movie behind. But yeah, I don't know what this translation is, as I've said. It's the book itself, like this edition, does not refer to the translator at all. So I'm pretty sure it's just like some public domain thing from like when the book first released in English. There's a little introduction here by Daryl Schweitzer, which I have to assume is uh just plucked from some book of his because it doesn't seem like it's talking about this book in particular, and it certainly doesn't mention it. It just kind of talks about Jules Verne in general. Wildside Press is not a bad press. They're definitely a print on demand. Uh, yeah, they are kind of a print on demand hellhole. Hellhole is way too strong a word for them. The thing is, with Wildside Press, I always know that I'm at least getting something that's proofread, and that's good enough. So I'd say that out of all the random Amazon like print, they're not really print on demand, are they? But out of all the random Amazon like shoveled out presses, Wildside Presses is probably one of the best ones. Oh yeah, apparently this book was based on a dead child, by the way. It came out the very year after the namesake of Stanford University, like Earl Stanford Jr. or something. He went on some grand tour in the manner of Godfrey Morgan in the story, and he died at age 15. And Jules Verne said, I can make a book out of this. And this came out, and we're here to enjoy it. Anyway, that's all I have to say for today. Thank you, YouTube. Peace.